My name is Martin Kim, VP of Strategic Partnerships for GenG Esports. Esports is booming today mainly because of timing and technology. People like to watch esports for the same reason that people like to watch professional sports in general. If you're a basketball fan and you just love seeing the highest competitive level of basketball, you become an NBA fan. For the same reason, just because the gaming industry globally is such a massive industry, you'd be surprised that there is actually a really top echelon of skill sets that are required to play those selected games. Competitive video gaming has been around since the 70s. A lot of people think esports is sort of a modern trend, but if you go back to the 70s, Atari, Nintendo's, there were always these highly competitive people that played these video games. Now, what made that into this huge boom of esports is probably technology, and the fact that you can watch it in real time and not have any sort of obstacles to watch this competitive battle for the games. So that's the reason why they're most popular today. But one of the surprising things for me was when I first entered the esports world, I really said like, hey, what is the margin between a really good gamer and these esports stars that we look at today? And I was shocked that there actually is a really, really big gap of skill sets. So for the same reason that a really good basketball player in high school looks at LeBron James and goes, oh my gosh, how does he do that? You get the same exact expression and the same responses in esports as well. So I think, yeah, it's just the perfect timing right now with the whole young generation playing a lot of games and then seeing the top most skilled players. That's the reason why esports, it is what it is today. Well, esports in general, the number right now, and it's hard to really quantify the entire thing. They're saying that we're going to reach $1 billion in revenue for the industry, and I don't want to put too much focus on that. I want to actually focus more on the gaming landscape. I just said that the esports business is around it's $1 billion. The gaming industry is nearing $200 billion. So if you look at an iceberg, right, the esports, the very top echelon of competitive sports, or competitive esports, now that is what we're dealing with. But holistically, we're looking at a much larger picture. And so that's why esports will continue to grow, because this pyramid has to continue to go up, and all of these users, these fans of these games, they continue to be attracted to watching competitive video gaming. And it's also just this generation. The same way that people in my generation grew up watching baseball and soccer and these things and sort of having their idols and becoming of age together with that. Today, if you go to any elementary school, middle school, most of them are engaging or playing some sort of a game at their age level, and I feel like that's the timeline, and that will continue to grow, and that's the reason why esports will continue to grow with that generation. For starters, the industry is still young. I said that esports has been around for a long time, but commercialized esports is a fairly young industry. Our company, we're barely 3 years old. But what sets us apart from the rest of the big organizations out there is probably the first one I think is the fact that we are starting global. Some orgs are better known in South Korea or in China or here in North America. We are challenging ourselves and really attacking the esports market in the 3 top markets, which is South Korea, China, and North America. So that's sort of our biggest differentiator currently. It gives us an edge because we kind of have a pulse on the entire esports industry as a whole, not just one specific market. And the other thing that really sets us apart is that we're trying to really transform what gaming does to this generation. The last thing we want is a generation of kids that just play games day and night. Like, that's not what we're trying to condone here. We're not trying to encourage people to go crazy about certain games and then become an esports star. That's actually silly, because like I told you earlier, there is a top 1 or 2% of the skill sets required to become a professional, while the rest is they're just avid gamers. So we're trying to really disrupt the industry and trying to utilize the passion for gaming to elevate this next generation into other things in life. So we have a GenG Academy in Korea, right, where it's an actual full-on school. Not just where we teach how to become better gamers, but also teaching English and also teaching secondary education, academics, everything all into this one school. We just launched a foundation to really encourage and support this next generation with scholarships into colleges. We really stand for diversity and inclusion. If you Google us, one of the first things that pops up is our all-female Fortnite team, for example. So we're doing a lot of things that, outside looking in, there might not be a lot of attention, but we feel like those are sort of the areas we want to become known for. Yeah, that's probably the single most common question I get on a daily basis. I was working in professional baseball for almost 8 years, and I was going down that path rather comfortably. And there was one thing that I was feeling working in baseball, and not just on the U.S. side, but internationally, which was the audience for professional baseball it does skew a little older. That's a fact. And me not being super old, also not super young, but I knew that, hey, I think I need to start focusing my attention on maybe the younger generation so that I can sort of keep up and continue to grow my career. And while I was in the midst of that mindset, my former boss at Major League Baseball, who is now our CEO at GenG, a really well-known guy in the sports world, him and I, we sort of grew a friendship while working in baseball. And we were having lunch one time, and he says, hey, I'm leaving Major League Baseball. And I was shocked because at Major League Baseball, he was well-respected. He had a very, very wide scope of a title and responsibilities. And most people probably thought he would be there for a very long time. And he says, I'm going to venture into esports. I was surprised. And then he said, hey, would you be interested in working together? And at first, I was like, I know nothing about games. I was a kid growing up that was climbing a tree, not playing video games. My parents bought me my first video console when I was probably in middle school. So I was definitely not the gamer, and that's something that's not a part of who I am. If anything, traditional sports is. But I started doing my homework, started doing my research, and man, I found that this audience, the under 30 audience right now, they're gravitating towards esports and gaming like nothing else. And then, like I told you just a second ago, comparing Major League Baseball to esports, where MLB, you have the audience is 70 to 80% above 30 years old. And then you look at esports where 90% of the audience is under 30. That's the exact mismatch, right? So that was one of the reasons that really attracted me towards studying and diving into esports to figuring that out. And secondly, being in an organization like Major League Baseball is such a huge org, right? I mean, if you're a baseball fan, who doesn't know Major League Baseball? Like the IPs, the history, 100 years old, globally, wherever you are, it's the most dominant platform. But because of the dominance and the sheer size of it, you are a very small individual in a huge organization. So I was sort of feeling like, man, as I get into this little sweet spot of my career to really make an impact on something, I don't know if I could make a huge impact in such a huge organization. Whereas the esports industry is at a young infant stage where, man, it would be super cool if 10 years from now I look back and I say, hey, a lot of these turns and pivots of the esports industry, my fingerprints are somewhat on that. I found that really attractive and just really challenging. And like I said on the previous question, I did a little bit of homework on esports, and not just Chris, our CEO, but just seeing some of the other leaders that are leading this GenG esports org. I was super confident that that ship would not sink, and I wanted to learn from the smartest people. So. Man, it's been nearly 2 years. Every day has been like doing homework, just learning something every day, just realizing how different this Generation Z and this young millennial audience, their consumer behavior and sort of how they engage with their platforms and their products are so different than what I was used to at baseball. So that's been the challenging part, but I feel younger because I'm dealing with a younger audience. I don't look younger, but yeah, it's been fun. I'll probably start with what is similar, and obviously when you look at esports at the top professional level, you're dealing with teams, right? So whether it's 4-on-4, 5-on-5, 6-on-6, and there's a strategy, there's positions, and there's scores, and it's live, and there's a live audience. For those factors, it's very much like traditional sports. I mean, you have everything that encompasses it. Mostly is you don't know the outcome. That's probably why it's considered a competitive sport. But there are a lot of differences as well. One of the biggest things that I was shocked by when I came to esports is the actual platform itself. So a lot of people that don't understand esports, they say, do you watch esports? I get that a lot. Do you watch esports or do you play esports? But the better question is, what game within esports do you watch or engage with, right? So the picture that I always like to draw is sort of like the Olympics. The Olympics is esports, right? And inside the Olympics, you have different tracks of different sports, right? And then you have the countries that represent all of the sports. So that's probably the best sort of matrix that I draw for people. Esports is like the Olympics, and within esports, there's different verticals of games, whether it's League of Legends, Overwatch, Fortnite, FIFA, I mean, you've heard them all, right? And then we are one of the orgs that we have teams for all those different games. So even within the esports world, there's different games, all right? So those games are owned and operated by private companies who are developers and publishers, whether it's the Epics, the Riots, the Blizzards, right, of the world. So that's probably the biggest difference between traditional sports and esports, because nobody owns the sport of baseball. Like, if you get 9 people and I get 9 people, we can play baseball and nobody can come and say, hey, don't play because I own this game, or nobody can say that. In esports, technically you could, because somebody owns that game, right? And because a developer is owning that platform, pros and cons, right? The pros is that you're constantly making it different every year. There's different patches and upgrades, right? That's probably the reason why the most popular game called League of Legends for over a decade has owned the largest competitive platform, which is called League of Legends Worlds, because they're able to tweak the game year after year and still make it challenging, right? Can you imagine if it was like the 90s where if you beat the game, it's over? If that was the case, then esports probably wouldn't exist, because once you beat it, what's the fun in that? So the fact that the IP, the platform, is owned by a private company, that's probably the biggest difference of it all. Yeah. In the esports world, you can't have the professional competitive side without the streamer vertical. And the streamer culture is one that took me a while to understand, coming from traditional sport, because it does not exist, right? But it is very much a pillar that holds up the industry. And the way I always tell people is, if the professional athletes in esports are the face of our team, the streamers are sort of the voice of our team. They're the ones with the personalities, the one with the audience, the one that have the streams, the regular streams that sort of amplify everything that is happening in the industry, right? If you look at esports as a whole, there's actually more successful streamers than there are players. There's more well-known streamers. Like, if I told you, if you go ask a 15-year-old kid, do you know who Ninja is? Everyone's going to say, yeah, I know who that is. He's a streamer. He's not a professional. He doesn't belong to a certain team. So, yeah, it took me a while to really digest what does this look like in the traditional sports world, and it's probably the closest thing to like the top athletes having a really engaging social media platform. But instead of like after the match, LeBron does an Instagram instead of doing the ESPN interview, he does it on his social platform, for example. Like that's kind of an example. Like I can mention a lot of streamers are also retired or former esports professionals that maybe didn't reach the very top competitive levels, but they have the personality, so they kind of become a broadcaster of the sport instead, right? So that's common. In Korea specifically, a lot of retired professional esports gamers become streamers because they have the following, they have the skill sets, and they're able to sort of engage with their audience in that manner. So the streaming vertical is very much a part of esports. It's not something that we're doing. Every org is doing it. We're just a little more strategic with how we do it. Right now in the US side, we're leading with all-female team. In Korea, we have some really well-known former professionals, but yeah, it's very much a living part of the esports world. With GenG, we're just trying to, like I said earlier, as we are carving out this new area and sort of trying to disrupt and change the game in areas that aren't traditional to esports. That's sort of our short-term and long-term goal, right? We're trying to see how much more can we do with the collegiate side and on the academic side. Personally, for short-term and long-term, the very reason why I took on this position and why I'm really enjoying this job is, like I said earlier, was really learning this new up-and-coming generation and how they interact and how they engage with each other and in the outside. So learning the Generation Z and the millennial consumer behavior, I think I'm really enjoying that because maybe from that, it comes my next step, right? So what can I do with that? So that's sort of my goals right now. And also another goal is I'm trying to pick up some games. I'm so bad at some of these games. So maybe I can become a somewhat of a gamer eventually, but I don't think it's gonna happen. If I was asked that question, what kind of advice would you give? I mean, the easy one, and this isn't rocket science, they would probably figure out, is to really understand the foreign market they're going into. Yes, it's global esports. Yes, it's global gaming, but it's dealing with a very different audience and a very different economic market and also a consumer market. So, you have to do your due diligence and really understand what you're getting into. Just because you're really successful in the China market, for example, or in the Korea market, it doesn't mean you can just hop over here, build an office and be successful. And that's very much the challenge that we're facing right now, is that everything that is successful in our Korea office doesn't necessarily mean we can just simply duplicate it here in America and vice versa. And some of the most successful things that we do on the US side, we try it in Korea and it does nothing. So really understanding that market and really admitting that it is a completely different market and doing the due diligence and doing your homework to really figure out what it is you're diving into. I think that step cannot be denied, can't be ignored. But once you sort of figure that out, obviously having the local understanding and having the local staff and doing it the local way is probably the most important advice I would give.